The views discussed in this conversation are the views of individuals and not of Arrington Capital. This podcast is provided solely for informational purposes and is not financial, legal, tax, or investment advice. The participants of this podcast are not recommending any particular security, protocol, token, financial instrument, or other tradable asset or any investment strategy. It is not offering to sell or soliciting to buy any security or asset.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Arrington Capital Pirate Podcast, where we take the chance to talk to our founders who are at the forefront of disrupting Web3. Today, we have Remy Carpinito from Esprezzo, which is a no-code automation tool. I'm a big fan of Remy. He's been doing some really fantastic things. Coming from a marketing background myself, I'm really excited to talk about how he's enabling and empowering organizations to differentiate their brands. There is a ton of data out there. It's unwieldy. So according to IDC, which is a market intelligence company, they did a report for Seagate, and the global data sphere by 2018 reached 18 zettabytes. It's estimated that by the end of 2025, at some point, about 175 or 180 zettabytes will be out there. That is 175 trillion 1 gigabyte USB sticks. So that is a huge amount of data. According to the World Economic Forum, about 10% of the global GDP could be stored on blockchains by 2025. And so you've got the birth of blockchains, you've got all this data, you've got the immutable and permissionless blockchains. It's only adding to this situation. It's also opening up the opportunity for new things to come. And data can be make or break for companies. I know I say that from a marketing perspective, but it extends beyond that function of the organization. And so I want to spend some time with Remy talking about what he's doing with Esprezzo and how all that data is being used for good, especially when it comes to Web3. Before we dive into those things, Remy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the journey that got you to tackling some of these problems?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kelly. Can kind of start back my first startup and get you up until this point. Been an entrepreneur now for 10 years full time operating, and started my first company in college, and it was called Campus Tap. Originally set out to replace the student ID card with NFC chips and smartphones with some of the first Samsung Galaxy phones and pre-iPhone Apple Pay. With that being said, we were slightly ahead of our time. That led to ultimately a slight pivot, and we ended up building out a mentoring platform for higher ed. That scaled out quite well. So we sold that mentoring solution into all the top universities across the United States, 70 plus schools, B2B SaaS play. We had about 1 million users at the peak of the business. And in 2017, we started exploring kind of going back to the root of the company and adding a new product line going back to identity solutions. This time we dropped the hardware component on the phones, and we tried to do a Ethereum-based identity solution for students. And the MITs and Harvards of the world were very excited at the time, but all of our other clients.
What year was this?
This was 2017, 2018. So early Ethereum, kind of the peak of the ICO days. But in terms of other schools beyond the MITs and Harvards, they weren't really understanding what we were doing. So we knew that wasn't the product to pursue. But coincidentally, we were approached in 2018 by a number of market leaders to acquire Campus Tap, and we ended up pursuing that acquisition and maintained full control of all of our Web3 IP, and that kind of became the backbone of Esprezzo looking forward. So my co-founder and I and some of the product team stayed together, and we started kind of brainstorming, conceptualizing different ideas for kind of crypto infrastructure. A lot of twists and turns since then, but one of the first things we did with Esprezzo as DeFi emerged out of the first bear cycle was the ability to plug into AMMs. So DeFi obviously was the large catalyst of the last cycle, and built out these kind of trackers and new pair and pool alerts on top of Uniswap. One of the first bots sitting on top of Uniswap, but we called it Unispotter. Published a simple blog post. We pushed out liquidity information into a Telegram bot. Did about 5,000 day traders sign up in the first 15 days. I think those are some of the early windfalls of being early and first to market in some capacity.
Not still around today, right?
You can build Unispotter type bots with dispatch in like 30 seconds. So what's interesting with that kind of product, it kind of validated our bigger thesis that people wanted access to data, but they didn't want to work for it, and they wanted it sent exactly where they were. And so we ended up just building a whole product around that, and that's what Dispatch is today, kind of a no-code automation platform to make it as easy as possible to get the data into the channels you want. And I'm happy to obviously unpack that a bit. But
yeah, and I want to unpack that because you've had some great use cases that come up recently, but let's step it back just a little tiny bit. Esprezzo, I think, is also doing a lot to empower Web3. You've
Sure.
been around for a little bit. You've seen the ebbs and flows of some of the recent cycles, new maturity, new inflection point that we're sort of at right here. There's a lot of Web3 native companies, but also companies that are leveraging Web3 to do more and go further. If you step back and think about it from Web3, but also the importance of data and automation in any org, what is your view of what people need today? Like, what's the problem that exists right now?
Yeah. I think zooming out, it's really interesting. I think data, as you mentioned earlier on, the amount of data can be overwhelming at times. And I think a lot of early companies in Web3 and beyond have focused on just general data delivery. And I think that's needed, that's essential. There's a kind of a baseline that has to happen. But as we think about application development and use cases and projects and teams kind of looking to access that data, it's less about the raw data and it's more about moving kind of up the stack, up the technology stack to make that data accessible to anyone on the team. That ultimately means you do not need to be a developer. You do not need to interface with a raw API. You don't even need to know how to code anymore in order to get the data you need exactly when you need it. And that's our bigger thesis. And the reality of that is that kind of trends into not a new category, but I think a category that's going to continue to be top of mind with the proliferation of new technologies like AI is no code automation, and the ability to kind of get the data you want by point and clicking. And obviously, there's deeper things you can do from a programmatic lens, but from a lot of product teams and marketing teams, there's an even bigger opportunity to enable these folks to not need to inundate the engineering team with internal requests to get specific features or internal tools developed. And so that's one of the bigger talk tracks we're hearing, is that there isn't enough bandwidth to kind of manage all of the internal requests that the product, marketing, and community teams have across Web2 and Web3 teams. And so no code automation tools enable this in a big way. And we saw this in Web2 with Zapier. I mean, Zapier is, I think, like an $8 billion company right now. And ultimately what they did is they just aggregated all the world's APIs and connected the dots between them. I think as we think about Web3, it's actually even a bigger problem because you have all these protocols coming online literally daily. The pace of innovation is faster than anything anyone's ever seen. I'm sure you feel that as well. And none of these protocols actually communicate with each other, especially as you start kind of crossing blockchains and crossing layers like layer twos, et cetera. You need to have this common thread behind the scenes. And that's something we see ourselves kind of playing a big role in. And again, not just through APIs, but through interfaces that anyone can use. And I think that's going to be a pretty massive unlock across a lot of these teams we work with, which span gaming, brand loyalty, next generation phygital items, all the way into more Web3 native companies like DeFi protocols and NFT lending. And so they all have unique problems, but their core kind of pain points all cycle around bandwidth, feature development prioritization, and larger ability to kind of get these types of alerts, notifications, and kind of data flows into the users in a unique way.
If you were to broadly talk about time, you mentioned bandwidth. If you were to broadly talk about time savings from an organizational,
Yep.
best practices, operations, what does something like this executed well mean from a time savings perspective?
So we've talked to teams that have taken a couple different routes when it comes to, us before we meet them. And the typical route is them building some sort of custom tooling. So, having the dev team build this kind of black box in the corner of their tech stack to index data and kind of build an alerting automation system to make some other feature work. The reality of that is, as they extend their protocol into other blockchains or they want to add new functionality or data sets to it, they need to go revisit that black box and retool it. And that's not their core product. Their core product's over here, up in the stack, which is more forward facing functionality. And so that could save, hundreds of hours of development bandwidth in reality, and like scoping and, definition and all that stuff. On the flip side, we see some teams use more kind of tooling that everyone uses, like block explorers, manually searching through logs and looking for specific events or function activity across a smart contract. And so in that case, that could be repetitive tasks where they may not be as labor intensive as a 100-hour development project, but they are just consistent 20, 30-minute jumping out of your workflow, searching through a set of events on block explorers, and then having to feed that into some other system. So in aggregate, it's a lot of time. And it's also what we enable is this kind of set it and forget it mentality. So once it is set up, our automations are typing data wherever you need it all the time. It's kind of like an extra set of eyes and an extra set of hands for you and your team. And that's what we're seeing as we start publishing a lot of these case studies. The feedback is extremely consistent. That we're, it's this kind of peace of mind we're bringing to the team as well as this additional bandwidth. So that's been super validating over the last few months.
Do you think, if you think about it, every Web3 company is a data company to some degree, right? Just because of the nature of what we're not. Fine. Do you think that most Web3 companies understand the significance? We've reached a point where everyone understands the significance of auditing smart contracts. There's been some standards in place, and there's security best practices and all this that have been going on for several years now. But what do you think about, where do you think we're at in the maturity of data best practices, if you were to call it that, or understanding the significance and importance of not just the basics of data, but what else it can be used for in terms of expanding and scaling and doing more with less, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think what's interesting, there's been like two camps in Web3 and crypto since the early days, like decentralize everything and kind of using blockchain for the value it really drives, and kind of authenticity and verification, and being able to look back to the blockchain and know that this is a valid piece of data. Yeah. And we kind of fall more in the latter camp. I think decentralizing the world, things will continue to evolve and become more decentralized, I believe. But in reality, when we start thinking about a lot of the applications and experiences that our clients are building towards, it's not about pure decentralization. It's about speed and kind of creating user experiences that people want to use. Like I think as an industry have come to the realization of that over the last cycle, is where we started kind of onboarding consumers, but the UX wasn't quite there. And I think that's been fixed in many different ways over this last bear market, with a number of onboarding companies getting funded and scaling, and a lot of the kind of tools needed to make these experiences feel more kind of accustomed to what people expect in the consumer world. And with that, it's about the data, it's about speed, kind of low latency, and kind of availability without needing to kind of break the normal UX patterns that we expect from a consumer lens. And so for us, I think talking to our teams that we're working with that is top of mind. Like they want to make sure that there is like a real-time feedback loop. So if someone takes an action, if they need to know something is happening, for example, we work with this game and they run tournaments powered through some of the data via dispatch. And so, if they're doing a unique kind of tournament that has an exclusive number of tokens being dropped, as the game is played, less and less tokens are available. So it kind of creates this driver to get people back into the game. That real-time nature actually gives you a competitive edge. And as we start to see more chains leveraging on-chain data, some games like Dark Forest, we don't work with them right now, but you have to search through on-chain smart contracts and event logs to actually play the game. Being able to get real-time data like that, or being able to set up your own custom bots to seek that particular data, becomes even more pertinent. So it kind of goes on various ends of the spectrum, but I think teams are starting to realize the data is super important. They're realizing they're not going to build it. I think the other big point that I wanted to make is early crypto, people wanted to build everything internally.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is like, we talked a little bit about time savings from implementation, but building a system like this, it's large. It's got a lot of...
Yeah, again, it's like some people build their own custom portion of it and they think it checks the box, but in reality, as they continue to grow, they need to continue to build this other piece of technology internally. And so now that they can offset it with dispatch, it saves them a ton of time. But it's also, I think, again, the maturation of the industry, realizing that not every protocol is going to be everything to all people. And you're not going to need to build every piece of infrastructure within your protocol. There are genuinely good third-party tools and pieces of data infrastructure out there that can help you accelerate product development and go to market. And that is something that it's taken some time for the industry. Like, we've felt that pain just even in the last cycle where, talking to protocols and this massive vision, which is great. But in reality, it's like, where's your core value? Like, what's the thing that makes you unique, and go focus on that. And that's happening more and more now as people kind of start reeling in the scope and start focusing on who they want to be and what they want to offer to the world.
I want to talk and unpack a little bit of the use cases that you have seen early days, but who else is really working on the data problems from your perspective? And again, I think your perspective is unique because you're seeing some of the Web2 stuff, you're seeing some of the Web3 stuff, and both have very significant needs when it comes to data and automation and how AI and machine learning all plays into that. Who else is working on the big data problems in crypto to make things actually happen for companies that need to be able to do more, that it's not the core competence?
The players we all know and many of us use are the Alchemies and Quick Nodes and Infures of the world, and the other kind of genuine blockchain node providers kind of give you that baseline data. And they started in that direction. We originally thought we were going to be more of like an Alchemy or Quick Node. And that's in what we found pretty quickly, that space got pretty commoditized. Like, there's 30 different node providers out there. So you can switch in and out of any node based on cost or based on latency, or they all kind of do similar things. So that's been interesting to see. But I think in reality, a lot of the data tooling, again, as I've mentioned earlier, is going to move up the stack. So it's less about interfacing with the raw node or where that data comes from. They're all ultimately coming from blockchain nodes. So it's a similar kind of talk track there, but they set the foundation in a very good way, in an impactful way, for a lot of these kind of tools and projects to stand up. Because in the early days, running your own infrastructure on that level is extremely time consuming and expensive. And even just syncing an Ethereum node can take up to months. It's crazy. So taking that out of the equation is super important. And now it's thinking about, okay, now that the data baseline is there, how do we start building experiences that can kind of push things forward to another level? Yeah, and I think that's where it's
like the layer 2 or layer 3 of like data.
That's exactly, as we move up the stack, it's getting closer to so as we think like node providers, kind of this middleware layer, and then we think about the application layer, we sit much closer to the application layer than, say, a node provider. Yeah. And that's ultimately where we're at.
Yeah, that's a good framing for it. You just announced a really cool partnership with N-State. N-State is a shoe company, sneaker company, right? And effectively, they are doing some community engagement, customer engagement, where they're putting the physical good with an NFT. Tell us a little bit about N-State and the program that they're running, and then let's talk about how you're sort of managing the data.
Yeah, for sure. N-State's a great team. I've known Bennett since the early days of crypto. He's a founder over there, and I remember during the days of his first company he built got acquired by GoDaddy. It was actually a patent-based system on the blockchain, and during we were conceptualizing some of his ideas for N-State on the golf course during COVID, and I was super excited. And as the last cycle started emerging, started to feel like it was go time. And I think, initially they started just as sneakers, but I think it's more of like next gen digital apparel, ultimately, or kind of physical and digital apparel. Mm-hmm. And they've worked with the likes of Devontae Smith, rookie, kind of led the Eagles last year in 2022 to an amazing run. And then also working with like pop stars, and worked more recently with the Spider-Man game. And they did a unique apparel drop, a tote bag in the middle of New York City the day Spider-Man 2 went live on the PlayStation 5. And what's interesting is, and what I really like about N-State is their approach to thinking about leveraging NFTs and kind of the digital piece of collectibles in a really unique way. In some instances,
is everything that they do tied to a physical good?
Yes.
Okay.
At this point, yes. So they started in both directions. So in the first drops, they started with the NFT first. So they would kind of use that as like the voucher to claim your good. And so for their initial drops, people would buy the NFT, and then they would be able to go have a claim period where you could actually put in your sizing, claim the specific colorway you got, and then that would, ultimately go into a manufacturing process. For the Spider-Man game, and what we helped them with, which was pretty interesting, is that they had the tote bags given out to individuals in real time, like live on the street in New York, at these daily bugle stands for Spider-Man fans. And within the tote bag was a little NFC chip, and that was a kind of end state powered chip, and that would kind of set a trigger of events that would ultimately occur. The big one for us was this claim function that would actually spur a smart contract event. And then that would also kind of feed into their inventory system that these items were physically claimed. So it's actually connecting the dots between the physical and digital world. And that's kind of that authenticity piece that the blockchain brings in a really unique way, where it's like, hey, this bag was actually claimed on this date by this person at this address.
And you can see that
and all that data.
Wallet, and it's being held here. And
Exactly. So that kind of claim function process, before dispatch, they were manually monitoring block explorers. I was talking to the head of engineering at Matt at N State, and he was telling me, he's like, man, we need dispatch to do this for us. And I was like, well, what specifically are you looking for? He's like, there's these specific functions that we need to monitor. And I'm sitting on this is the lead dev over there. And he's like, I'm sitting on the block explorer looking for them, crawling logs. Can you just push this out to our channels and to our database so I don't need to do this. Like, I've been inundated with, other drops that we're starting to work on. And so that was one of, with the new smart contract we did in late Q3, early Q4, that was one of the core parts of, pieces of functionality to enable people to monitor smart contract events and functions in under 30 seconds. You can add any smart contract, existing or new or unverified, and then pick the events and functions you want and create real-time bots. In their instance, they're using a Discord bot to push into their internal team channel so they can monitor real-time, like the mint or drop that's being happening at that given point in time. And they're also looking to kind of dig deeper with like webhooks to push this data into their actual inventory system. So connecting the dots between, native Web3 blockchain data into their Web2 systems. And we anticipate that being a continuous thing as we continue to work with more teams, kind of connecting the dots between these, Web3 systems and Web2 systems. And the reality is, what N State's not a crypto infrastructure company. They don't want to build this custom tooling to kind of connect these two disparate systems. And that's where I think that is a common talk track. We've talked to 200 teams now, and that's people don't want to build this kind of translation layer. And that's something we can really help with.
Yeah, translation layer is interesting, especially as you start seeing more and more people understand the impact that some Web3 element could have. And you can say, this is a really good example too of inventory management, inventory control, and not being wasteful. The fashion industry is getting dragged through right now for like throwing away all their stuff, right?
Yep.
And then, but also just supply chain management and that looks like, and who's buying it and where. And now, are they tracking, or are you tracking for them?
We can track all the transfer activity, even post mint, which is pretty interesting. So they can kind of see the movement across their holders and their various NFTs in real time as well.
Yeah, and that's where you're posting the post sale activity. You can do a lot with that data
exactly
in terms of how you can go out with things. Yeah. Okay. You've got a couple others. I think there's one on betting or gaming.
We've been talking to literally hundreds of teams over the last quarter as we started ramping up outreach. And one of the early ones we connected to once we activated Coinbase's new blockchain base was this company called Satoros. They're building a decentralized sportsbook for the NFL and the Premier League, as well as the UFC, and many more leagues to come. But they're somewhat senior actual crypto Web3 team. This is their second or third startup, I believe. Okay. And but they're still pretty early in the protocol development process. And ultimately what that means is it's prioritizing what you're spending your development cycles on is mission critical. And this is something we hear all the time. It's like, are we going to build our own thing, or can we use a third party to help get us out the door faster? And it's more trending towards the latter. And for them, they wanted to start adding kind of these new smart contracts for these different leagues, somewhat kind of recurring and rapidly. So being able to monitor that activity and understand what's happening on, in real time across their protocol was super important. So they've set up, I think, like 10 plus automations using Dispatch, sitting on top of all their different smart contracts to monitor kind of full, stop all of their betting activity across their protocol. I think it's a really interesting use case. Obviously, sports betting in just general, Web2 has been massive and starting to be a regulated space and getting a lot of approval across many more states over the last several years. And watching that kind of proliferate has been amazing. So seeing a team kind of focusing on the decentralized version of that now on a somewhat global scale is really exciting. Working, with the base team and understanding more of their kind of strategy and kind of positioning in the Web3 space has also been really interesting. So a lot of opportunity there. They've been a great team to work with.
Okay. And then Dispatch, just to clarify, Dispatch is the core Esprezzo product right now, right? That's one of the
Yes. So Esprezzo is the company and Dispatch is our core no code automation platform. That's been out.
So we've talked about physical goods, retail, supply chain. We've talked a little bit about gaming and betting and monitoring some of those things. I think you're also working with a couple of DeFi projects. I think that gets a little interesting, right? Because there are so many smart contracts. We've got this model for auditing smart contracts. There's a process where you can kind of check the box and understand that smart contract is complete, it's ready, it's there, it's safe. But then people are forgetting, like you said, that's still the layer one of data. But beyond that, you've got all this other data to look at that's going in and around and through smart contracts. So how are you thinking about Dispatch, the Esprezzo product, from like a DeFi perspective?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think DeFi and even like NFT lending and some like NFT-fi and even social-fi and some of these other kind of newer concepts are really interesting and will continue to be a big part of this next cycle. And as we've been talking to these teams, yeah, it is interesting. I mean, when we look at their docs and, I go into a call and I typically aggregate some of their smart contracts and show them what they can do on the call and and demo the product. They have dozens of smart contracts per protocol. And so as you think about that, they don't have 100 people on their team to keep an eye on what's going on. And so there's hypothetically hundreds of different smart contract events or functions that can be called at any point in time based on whatever their protocol is doing. So for like DeFi lending or NFT lending, being able to look at loans and lenders and matching them up has been a big thing that we've been talking to a lot of projects about, and being able to kind of relay new loans that are up or that people are seeking financing for, to be able to match that with people that are interested in particular categories is really interesting. So being able to say, okay, they're lending CryptoPunk, they want to only be notified of other people that were looking to kind of lend against the CryptoPunk. So there's some kind of nuance there, and that in this particular use case, like for the NFT lending, they're looking to help with their BD process. And so they want to, and right now they actually send out their team manually to ping the lenders to say, hey, there's a couple loans that may be of interest to you, where we can automate that entire flow just because we can sit on top of the contract. We can say, hey, CryptoPunk was just put up for a loan. We know these 10 people over here like to lend against them. Let's notify them. And so building out tools like that is really interesting. And, again, I think as we just continue to uncover more conversations in Web3, there's some really interesting new use cases that just continue to emerge, like literally every day when we're on the phone. And they're all within the realm and scope of Dispatch, but it's just a different way these teams need to use the data on chain. And I think when you start thinking about these DeFi protocols and, NFT kind of fi protocols, since there is so much data, there are so many use cases. And the other piece that we see on the DeFi front, talking to a lot of founders, is that they want another set of eyes on their smart contracts, more from a security lens. Yeah. So being able to see admin change activity, role revoked activity, things that if they fire, it is red flag, all hands on deck, what is happening, or did we do it, or was that intentional? So being able to just have a monitor like Dispatch set up on top of that through a very different, somewhat simple lens in terms of our functionality, still also creates a kind of peace of mind for the team. So that's been very interesting as well.
Do you see yourself as a security company, or that's sort of secondary?
It's not a core kind of driver of the business, but again, like given the flexibility of the tool we built, we do enable security type of alerting and monitoring. Another thing, one of the first things we built with Dispatch before we even got to smart contracts was the ability to monitor wallets at scale. And so we have a lot of teams kind of dropping in their hot wallets to have a direct DM go out to a Telegram channel anytime there's movement across a hot wallet. Again, just as another set of eyes. And so, beyond smart contracts, and that's not necessarily security, but it's just keeping a pulse on what's going on across the team, especially as so many teams have so much access in terms of movement of crypto or paying gas fees, or maybe they need to know, hey, if this is below 0.5 ETH, we need to top up to keep the system flowing. So a lot of different kind of nuanced use cases that pop up. But I think the cool thing that we're seeing is that as we work with a team, there's other members of the team that can use it in a different capacity. So it's not just for the head of product or the head of marketing or community. It kind of spans across the team in different ways. And I think that's going to be a big focus of us, is uncovering those type of use cases and talking about them and sharing them with the world of how different folks in your team can kind of benefit from the technology.
When you look at all these use cases and all these opportunities, we'll get to roadmaps and sort of what comes next for Esprezzo.
Sure.
But how did you build this? Did you build it in a way that you can accommodate all of these growing use cases that you see from a data and organizational efficiency perspective?
Yeah, I think there's two lenses that I look through as like an operator in terms of like how you focus up either, the product in terms of serving particular verticals, and then also talking about it through a marketing and messaging and positioning standpoint. And from a technology lens, my co-founder and I, AJ, as I mentioned, we've been working together forever. We've always wanted to build a system, especially as we thought about Web3, that is somewhat horizontal, that can scale horizontally across verticals, because we don't know what's next. No one really does. Like last wave, NFT JPEGs went crazy. Like who knew? This wave, it may be social applications. It could be gaming, could be anything. But we wanted to build a system that whatever that is, we're ready. And so what does that mean for us literally? Well, we can, as I mentioned earlier, we can take in any smart contract instantly. So whether that's a new protocol like
does it matter what chain it's built on? Does it matter?
Yeah, so so I guess to talk about the chains real quick, we're agnostic. We support any chain that is brought to us through multiple kind of touch points, and we'll prioritize that in our backlog and get it integrated. We can launch EVM chains somewhat instantaneously. Non-EVM chains, a little bit more work, but 100% within the scope of our product. So we're agnostic. I think that matters less and less over time. The analogy I always say is like no one really cares which database it's built on from a consumer lens. So we'll make sure we keep the data flowing wherever it needs to go. From a smart contract standpoint, as new standards get released, like account abstraction, we have new NFT standards being proposed. All of that can be ingested through Dispatch. We actually can take in any ABI, even if it's unverified. You can upload custom ABI into the system, and we'll parse all the data, and you can use the point and click interface to get what you need. So it's very agnostic on that front, and that's the piece that I think allows us to be really flexible from a product standpoint. So as we continue to look forward from serving different verticals, we're in a very strong position to do so. From a marketing and messaging standpoint, we need to be more focused. We're not a team of 100 yet. So being able to really focus on kind of finding the niche and the pain points within specific verticals is hyper mission critical right now. So far we've focused on brands and the kind of digital apparel space. We focused on gaming. And then recently we've had this huge inbound influx from DeFi and kind of NFTFi since we've onboarded Arbitrum and Optimism as well. And so there's a lot of companies in those verticals. And so that's where we've been focusing a lot of our initial efforts. But as we've been publishing some of our case studies and started ramping up on the kind of content marketing, we're seeing other inbound inquiries come in somewhat organically. So recently we just got off with the largest, Web3 bank, crypto bank in the US that's looking to use this as a large scale monitor for all kind of smart contract activity for their clients. Wow. So that's, talk about scale, they bank all the top, investment shops. So large scale stuff. And that's a really interesting use case. And I think as we think about, other verticals coming in, especially, with the ETF finally being approved, more and more like banking sector, fund managers, and et cetera, that this type of data over time as, potentially more various tokens, et cetera, get approved in the traditional markets, these type of tools could also open up. So forward looking, like there could be a lot more that could be done in some of these large existing industries. But for now, we're focused over here, and we'll see where, the demand takes us.
How technical are the people that you're selling to now versus how technical do you think they'll be in sort of a future state a couple of years down the road?
It's kind of a gamut right now. I mean, we work with like the head of engineering at N State who is building their systems, but we also in the same concept, we also work with some of their marketing team to kind of pump it into their Discord community as well. What we're finding is we meet with a lot of founders depending on the team size, and they'll either push us to head of product, head of community, head of marketing, or head of operations if they have that role. And so more often than not, though, it's not. What's interesting as we go into these calls, most of the teams think, oh, I didn't loop in my lead developer. We'll have to do a follow-up call. I walk them through the product. They go, oh, wow, I could do this myself. I 100% don't need to bring them in.
Amazing.
One, they're inundated. They don't have any time. So like, I don't want to bring them in. Now I don't have to. And so after we hop off those calls, we're starting to see people set up their own patches and automations instantly, like less than a day after those calls in some instances. And so that's been obviously super validating, but kind of this assumption that we have that we need to enable the non-technical folks to be able to do what they need to do, whether it's internal or external communication. And I think the one thing in Web3 that I haven't really said yet is that almost I feel like every tool being built is for a developer. And there are so many dev tools out there. And so being able to kind of start thinking about it a bit more holistically and building tools for non-developers, while they can still use the product and seriously benefit from it, it's saying, hey, that's not our core audience today, but there's other groups that can leverage this is really huge. So I think that's a huge piece of what we're doing is kind of going after the non-devs traditionally within these companies. And I think that's going to allow us to scale up quite a bit.
You've kind of answered where I wanted to go here at the end to sort of wrap it up in terms of what comes next for Esprezzo. It can obviously get huge. Data's huge, as we started out talking about sort of the monstrosity numbers from a data perspective globally. What role does Esprezzo have in onboarding, all a new generation to Web3?
Yeah, no, I think it's super interesting. I think the first part that I know we can do is kind of build awareness of this tool and these types of tools to traditional Web2 and Web3 teams. Web3 teams immediately see the value. They realize the bandwidth it can save them, and they latch on relatively quickly. The Web2 teams need a little bit more education, but as they realize what they need to do and what they need to build in order to kind of make their use cases work, hypothetically, we could abstract away the need to build any Web3 tools at all for the Web2 teams. Because if they had to deploy a smart contract the second that's out there and associated to their brand or to their project or whatever they're using it for, that data can now flow from dispatch into any of their systems. They could output to a webhook and integrate into their traditional database. They could output to a webhook and integrate it into their user-facing dashboard in their core app that's been around for a decade. They don't need to think about all the nuances of Web3 and the translation and all the different data sets and how are you going to get smart contract data bytecode out into a human readable form. We kind of handle most of that for them. For us, the biggest opportunity I see is like kind of defining this automation no code category in Web3. I think this is going to be one of the most important things in this cycle to help teams accelerate from 0 to 1. And I also think on the Web2, as more Web2 companies move in, to be able to help them get what they need out of Web3 as quickly as possible without needing to hire a 10-person engineering team to accomplish their goals. So that's kind of two areas we see a lot of opportunity in.
It's amazing. Remy, where can people go to find out more about Esprezzo and Dispatch?
Yeah, Esprezzo, ESPREZZO.io. And then we're also on Twitter at Esprezzo app. We're posting updates pretty regularly. We are coming out of beta state pretty soon, but if you want to get in there and get early access, you can sign up today and drop in your company or project name. We'll either reach out or approve you if it's a good fit for now. And super excited. We've kind of been hitting a pretty significant inflection point over the last couple months, and palpable momentum moving into this 2024 new year.
Fantastic. Remy, you're well positioned for what's to come here as the cycle spins up and crypto continues to grow and grow. Thank you for joining us here.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Kelly. Thank you.